Welcome to episode 6 of Cannabis Corner. Thank you for tuning in. This video is getting posted on Super Bowl Sunday, so we're going to be starting out with some cannabis-related Super Bowl news. Then we're going to go into some industrial hemp updates, followed by some state and federal regulatory updates on the THC side of things, and then we're going to wrap it up with some psychedelic-related news. Hope you enjoy. We're kicking this episode off with a Weedmaps Super Bowl ad that was rejected by NBC. Funny enough, the ad's actually about cannabis censorship. It highlights broccoli, he's a broccoli emoji, and he's tired of being associated with cannabis and cannabis use. He's just a broccoli, he wants to live his life as a normal broccoli. But there's no cannabis emojis, no weed leaf emoji, so people will often use the broccoli emoji. So the COO of Weedmaps said the answer was a hard no. They wouldn't even entertain the conversation. And I'm not going to play the ad, but you can find it pretty easily on YouTube. And the censorship does not end there because Weedmaps took to Twitter to say our Save Broccoli graphic was removed for violating community guidelines for the sale of illegal or regulated goods on Instagram. They're saying shortly after our backup account was disabled without reason and has not since been reactivated. So I don't know if this is just an algorithm where this stuff happens automatically or there's someone at Instagram like actively censoring this stuff. Instagram and Facebook historically censor cannabis stuff pretty heavily, so I'm not super surprised by this, but it seems like we're going to need federal legalization for advertising restrictions to loosen a little bit because everyone just goes back to saying, hey, this is illegal federally, we're not going to let you talk about it, and then the conversation ends there pretty much. For segment 2, we have Willie Nelson pushing for the legalization of comfort in a Super Bowl ad that is going to get airtime during the game. So this is a Skechers ad, and it has Willie Nelson sitting in a chair saying comfort and Skechers should be legal. And then there's a director in the ad that says like, hey, Willie, Skechers are completely legal. What are you talking about? And I don't think Skechers cares too much about cannabis legalization at the end of the day. They just want to sell shoes. And this is a creative way to do so. It's they're inserting their brand into a hot button cultural topic of cannabis legalization. At the end of the day, I think this still helps the cannabis industry though, because people in the industry are going to talk about this and they're going to compare this to the Weedmaps article that got censored and then they're going to say, hey, Skechers was a little creative. Their goal was to just sell shoes, but it is still talking about cannabis legalization. And it kind of highlights that you got to be a little sneaky. You got to not talk about cannabis when you talk about cannabis. So this might be a blueprint for the future of people getting cannabis related ads approved for the Super Bowl. For segment 3, we're pivoting away from Super Bowl related news, and this is kind of a follow-up from last week. So last week I talked about this Australian building company, Hemp Squared. They received $100,000 from the government to increase the production capacity of their business. This week, there's news of a bushfire that ran through one of their manufacturing sites, and it actually highlights one of the many benefits of building with hemp. So there's a picture here at the bottom. They kept all of their hemp blocks outside to cure, and unfortunately they lost a lot of inventory because these were not fully cured blocks yet. But in the background you'll see some blocks that were fully cured and they're fine. They look like they were untouched from the fire. They'll be used in a future building site, and so they didn't lose all their inventory, but unfortunately they did lose a good portion of it that was not fully cured yet. But this just highlights one of the many benefits of building with hemp. These communities that are prone to wildfires like west coast of the United States or bushfires in Australia, it's very important that we build those homes out of a material that's going to be fire resistant. It's not fireproof. You're not going to be completely safe inside of your house if there's a fire outside. But if there was a community that was built out of all hemp houses, a fire is going to spread through that community much slower than it would if all of those houses were built out of traditional building materials like wood and all these other toxic materials that are used commonly in homes nowadays. If a wildfire goes through a whole community, burns all these houses to the ground, I think the government should put an emphasis on subsidizing those homes being rebuilt with materials that are more responsible, especially for the environment that they're in if they're prone to forest fires. This is a massive part of the hemp industry that I think is going to scale very quickly in the next decade, but there needs to be more hemp cultivation, more hemp processing before the hemp building space can really scale. So for the next segment, we actually have a highlight of one of the companies in the United States that's playing a critical role in scaling hempcrete building. So the company is called Americhanvre Hemp. They're based out of Pennsylvania, and this is Cameron McIntosh, the founder of the company. His company is the US-based distributor for the Easy spray application machine, which is this French system. And so he builds homes all over the United States using this system when he can, because it's much more efficient than traditional like hand cast method, which is really labor and time intensive. If the hempcrete building market is going to scale, it's with tools like this that drastically improve the efficiency of building the house and how long it actually takes and the cost associated with it. So the news here is that Americhanvre Hemp has gotten the approval from eReezy to produce a very similar machine here in the United States. So they're going to manufacture it in Ohio. They're going to cater the electrical components to US-based electrical systems, so it's going to work better. Replacing parts is going to be easier because it's all going to be based in the US. And so Cameron McIntosh is really leading the way here when it comes to building hempcrete homes in the United States. So big shout out to Cam. If you're looking to have a hempcrete house built, definitely reach out to Americhanvre and they should be able to make it happen for you. For segment 5, we have some news out of New Zealand and this hemp firm receiving a $1.3 million government grant for R&D. So the name of the company is New Zealand Natural Fibers, and they're going to use the grant to investigate hemp plant genetics and develop hemp fibers for products like flooring, food packaging, and activewear, among many other things that are mentioned in this article. This is also not the first grant they've received from New Zealand, so they must be doing something right. And it seems like they're going to try to control every aspect of the supply chain. They're looking into cultivation practices, processing practices, and value-added product manufacturing from the hemp fibers that they're processing. And just like any other hemp market, it's going to be regionalized. So ideally, every step of that supply chain does occur in New Zealand for them to really have an efficient hemp market. So I had never heard of New Zealand Natural Fibers before, but they're definitely on my radar now. So if I see any news that comes out of this research, I will be sure to keep everyone updated. For segment 6, we're sticking on the topic of grants, and we have the U.S. Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack giving a nod to hemp in the announcement that the federal government is going to allocate $1 billion in grants to support climate-friendly farming. He was at Lincoln University and was quoted saying, "Industrial hemp is just a tremendous crop. The fact that you can have building material, you can have clothing, and a variety of other things is pretty interesting. For any of those end products, so the building materials like Americhanvre hemp and all these other things, it starts with the farmers. We need the farmers to be growing more hemp. And this is a way to incentivize those farmers. When it comes to climate responsible farming, I don't know if there's a crop better than hemp. So this is necessary. The government needs to step in and help fund these more responsible ways of doing things. So I'd love to see this. I'm going to keep an eye on where this money goes. And since the 2018 Farm Bill, after that, there was a big CBD gold rush. Everyone was growing hemp for CBD. Since then, since the 2019 season, total acreage grown for hemp in the United States has been decreasing every year. So I'm hoping that this is one element that helps reverse that and we get that acreage to continue going up, because if we want any of these end products, paper, clothing, building materials, it starts with the farmers. We need the farmers to grow a lot more of this stuff in the United States. For segment 7, we have a new bill called the Hemp Advancement Act that was introduced by Representative Shelley Pingree from Maine, and it's going to make some amendments to the 2018 Farm Bill. It's going to do a few different things. Right now, hemp has to be below 0.3% THC to be considered industrial hemp, and that is done through an in-field test before harvest. So before harvest, your hemp has to be below 0.3% THC. Doesn't matter if you're going for grain, fiber, or CBD, you're still subject to that test as of right now. So this bill looks to change that to 1% on a final product basis. So there's going to be no field testing. And if you're growing for fiber or for grain, obviously there's no CBD in your product, so you're going to be fine there. And then if people are growing for CBD and they did have a little bit too high THC in their product, there's ways to remediate the THC out. So as long as in their final product there's not more than 1% THC, they're going to be fine. And this also amends some wording where in the 2018 Farm Bill, it specifically mentions Delta 9 THC. This amendment, the Hemp Advancement Act, says total THC. It doesn't make any specification of Delta 8, Delta 9. So this bill may put an end completely to the Delta 8 THC market. People have mixed feelings about this based on kind of where they stand on the Delta 8 situation. But some of the other things that this is going to do is it's going to allow people with prior drug-related felony convictions access to work in the hemp industry. And it's also going to open up some more testing requirements in terms of who's eligible for testing. As of right now, it has to be a DEA certified lab that does the testing. It's going to change that. So just in terms of the 1% THC thing, this is big. Like, this is a very necessary amendment that needs to be added to the 2018 Farm Bill. I'm hoping this passes. I'm not a big fan of the Delta 8 craze anyway and everything going on with that. So I'm supporting this bill. It's going to be interesting to see if this actually makes it through. For segment 8, we have a veteran cannabis lobbyist launching a new political action committee to fight for legalization and elect pro-reform politicians. So it's called the Bull PAC, and it stands for Better Organizing to Win Legalization, and they're saying pun totally intended, of course. So it's being led by Justin Streckel, who was at Normal as their political director for 5 years. So he's familiar with working on Capitol Hill, lobbying for cannabis reform. And if we scroll down a bit here, they're saying that their first action is calling upon the President of the United States to fulfill his campaign promise of providing relief to those with cannabis convictions via pardons. So Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, when they were campaigning, said that they wanted to get people out of jail who were serving nonviolent cannabis crimes. They have not done anything about that. They haven't talked about it at all. So this is long overdue. I'm hoping the Bull PAC can make a difference there. And I personally don't think lobbying should even be legal at all. But if there's going to be alcohol, big pharma, tobacco, all these lobbies, it makes sense that there's a cannabis lobby as well. So I'm hoping the Bull PAC can make a difference. For segment 9, we have Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer providing a timeline for the introduction of a long-awaited cannabis descheduling legislation. So apparently Chuck Schumer's been talking about this, and he's going to formally introduce the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act in April. So it's going to do a few different things. So if we scroll down here, it's going to remove cannabis from the Federal Controlled Substances Act, and it's going to allow states to either maintain or establish their own cannabis regulatory policies free from undue federal interference. It's also saying that states would not be permitted to prohibit the interstate commerce of legal cannabis products transported through their borders. So it's going to open up interstate commerce, which is huge. It's also going to put an emphasis on the expungement of records for anyone with federal nonviolent cannabis offenses, and it's going to prohibit businesses from taking discriminatory actions against people who legally use cannabis. Now, I don't understand how all this stuff works. There's like 5 different bills that are going to do very similar things: deschedule cannabis, put an emphasis on expungement, and all these different things. The MORE Act, the Safe Banking Act, the States Act, the States Reform Act, all in different stages of Congress. So it seems like they're doing a little too much, in my opinion. I would just prefer for them to focus on bills that have already been approved by the House. Nevertheless, Chuck Schumer is going to be introducing this in April. Maybe they're giving up on the other ones and they're going to put an emphasis on trying to get this one passed. We'll see. I'm not holding my breath that we're going to see any federal reform in the next year or two, but nevertheless, at least there's some activity. For segment 10, we have a little bit of a disagreement going on in the government of South Dakota. So the Senate has passed a bill saying that their medical patients are going to be allowed to grow cannabis at home. Meanwhile, the House has passed their own bill prohibiting home grow. If you've watched any of my other episodes, home grow is a big topic in states creating cannabis legislation. South Dakota is obviously one of them. My stance on this, I've mentioned before: if we're allowed to brew beer at home, we should be allowed to grow cannabis at home. And that's for the adult use market, never by the medical market. We shouldn't be required to go to a store to buy their cannabis just so that the government can collect a tax from it. It doesn't make too much sense. For segment 11, we have congressional lawmakers condemning a federal utility company's medical cannabis electricity threat. So Mississippi recently approved medical cannabis, and this federal utility company, Tennessee Valley Authority, services northern Mississippi. And they basically threatened all cannabis companies, saying, if you're a cannabis company and we service you, we're probably going to shut off your electricity because cannabis is federally illegal and we're a federal utility company. Whoever put that press release together was obviously not aware of how the law works, because the Department of Justice is not allowed to interfere with states that have approved cannabis programs. And so these politicians reached out. And since then, Tennessee Valley Authority has put out another press release saying, we're going to do some digging on this to make sure that we're proceeding in the correct way. So medical cannabis companies in Mississippi will be able to get electricity, no problem. But it's just funny to see this utility company come out and say, hey, we're not going to support you guys because we're against cannabis. Just kind of outdated takes on cannabis. For segment 12, we have Colorado setting a sales record in 2021. They did $2.2 billion worth of cannabis products in 2021. So they've set a record every year since sales started in 2014. Colorado, along with Washington, were the first states to commence adult use sales of cannabis. And since they have started sales, they have collected more than $2 billion in tax revenue. So that has gone to public school systems, infrastructure, and a lot of different things. Colorado does a pretty good job of providing transparency of where that money's going. Just some more evidence for other states to see, after 8 years, they've generated $2 billion worth of tax revenue. I'm sure every state in the country over an 8-year period would love to have an increase of $2 billion in tax revenue. So the data is there for other states to make educated decisions on if they want to legalize cannabis. In my opinion, everyone knows people are going to be using cannabis regardless if it's legal or not. So might as well legalize it and take advantage of some of the tax revenue. You should let people grow it at home. You don't need all the tax revenue. Let people make it themselves if they want, but give them a regulated option to purchase from a store. Speaking of regulated options for people to purchase cannabis, the first adult use store in Cambridge, Massachusetts is going to be opening in the next week or two. For people not familiar, Cambridge is right north of Boston. It's where MIT and Harvard are, major metro area. And neighboring Somerville, Cambridge and Somerville both said years ago, they said any dispensary that gets an adult use license in Cambridge or Somerville is going to be a social equity applicant. I think in the future, they'll open it up to other businesses, but they said in the beginning, it's only social equity applicants that we're going to approve for adult use licenses. So it made some of the existing cannabis companies that had medical locations in those cities kind of upset because this was not known during the medical program that they were going to do that. But I think it's a good move. It puts an emphasis on making sure these social equity applicants get to take advantage of being a first mover in a major metro area like Cambridge and Somerville, where it's a lot of young people with relatively high disposable income. So I think YAMBA Market is going to do very well. They're right in Central Square, like in between MIT and Harvard. So if you're in the Cambridge area, definitely check out YAMBA. Another social equity applicant in the Boston area is Pure Oasis. They're in Dorchester, so not really right in the city, but support these companies. Like if you're going to go get cannabis and you want to support small minority-owned businesses, it's not hard to find where these companies are. So do a little digging. If you're in Boston, go to YAMBA, Pure Oasis, and get your cannabis products there. We're going to wrap this episode up with 2 articles about psychedelic compounds. In this specific one, the DEA is facing backlash over proposed scheduling of 5 psychedelic compounds. So there's 5 different tryptamines that the DEA is saying they're going to put onto Schedule 1. So as we know, that's where cannabis, MDMA, psilocybin, it's reserved for substances with a high rate of addiction or abuse and no medicinal benefit. So there's researchers, there's politicians, there's veterans saying that, hey, there's actually potentially some medicinal benefit to these substances. Please don't put them Schedule 1 because then our research is going to be very difficult to move forward with. When it comes to tryptamines, so our brains naturally produce some tryptamines, serotonin, melatonin. Those are tryptamines that our brain naturally produces. They're also found in plants. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me that we're not putting emphasis on studying these substances that are found in our brain, that occur naturally and also occur naturally in nature. It seems like those should be studied more and not kind of locked away in Schedule 1. We'll see what happens with this. The next article is a little more optimistic, and it's Maryland Senate presenting a bill that would provide cost-free access to psychedelics for military veterans. Maryland is home to Johns Hopkins University, which is where some of the leading research in terms of psychedelic therapies is taking place. So this bill would establish what's being called the Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Alternative Therapies Fund, and it's going to fund research into psychedelics and also provide cost-free access to alternative therapies for the target communities. So there's a lot of research already that's taken place that shows evidence that these substances can, in fact, provide therapeutic benefits to various ailments like PTSD, anxiety, depression, among many other things. So it's good to see kind of a dichotomy of individual states seeming to be more open-minded about these things, where the federal government-run institutions like the DEA are seemingly getting more strict on these substances. So we'll see how this shakes out, but it seems like more and more states and individual cities are loosening their restrictions around psychedelics and even encouraging research. So I'm optimistic about the future of this type of research, and I think it really has the potential to provide a lot of therapeutic benefits to the various mental health ailments that we're dealing with as a country right now. So that wraps up Cannabis Corner episode 6. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like the video or subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and I'll be back next week for episode 7.